Hi, fellow gardeners. I get a lot of questions about how I grow raspberries in Sacramento, California, Zone 9B. Most berries grow in much more moderate temperatures than the Sacramento Valley. We're considered a Mediterranean climate here in Zone 9B. We have extremely hot summers, hot, long, dry summers, and we have very short, wet winters that receive very, very little cold. So we get very few chill hours here, which is the amount of time that a lot of fruiting plants need dormancy-wise in order to set really great fruit the next year. For berries, most berries grow the best in areas like the Pacific Northwest or the upper U.S. states. And that is not what we have here. We don't have cool, rainy summers. We don't have moist, organic, filled soil. We have very hot temperatures and very hot, bright sun, which is not really the best for most berry plants. That said, I've been growing berries for close to a decade now in this particular garden. I actually grew up in Oregon, and recreating my childhood climate seems to be kind of the goal nowadays. But I want to show you these raspberries. These are raspberries. This variety is called Nantala. It is not easily found in trade anymore. I got these from Norse Farms nearly a decade ago. And is one of the best varieties for this region. They also have other varieties available in a lot of those big box stores called Baba Berry, I believe Canby, and Heritage. And I found that they're all sorely lacking in performance. They will grow okay, but the fruit tends to be very small, very dry, and very crumbly. This variety produces really big fruit for me. Oftentimes fruit that are double attached, so they look, I like to say they look like Madonna's cone bra, two little berries attached to each other, which is not the best for commercial growing, which is why I think the variety has been phased out. But it does perform reasonably well here in this hot climate and does really well if you follow a few key traits. Now, raspberries, this variety of raspberry will produce twice a year for me, once in early June and then again as the heat tapers down in September. And I will often get fruit up until the rains come in November. I'll find stray raspberries that I can continue to enjoy. So this is how I grow them. This bed is 3 feet wide by 12 feet long, and then I have another bed behind it that is 3 feet wide and 10 feet long. And that's enough raspberry plants for me to be able to enjoy munching on them nearly every night that they're in production, and have plenty to freeze and use for desserts, and freeze in gallon bags over the winter to add to my daughter's oatmeal. So if you are just starting, these beds are approximately 18 inches high, but you can see the soil has sunken down quite a bit. So I'd probably say the soil is about, probably a little over a foot deep, maybe about 14 inches deep here. And it is a really great garden planting raised planter mix, which is a really good mix of compost. I don't use any topsoil blend, which is just for us it's river bottom soil, which is essentially loamy sand, doesn't have any organic material in it or any nutritive value. So I just avoid that. It becomes very heavy. And it drains too quickly for raised planter beds. So I just like to use an organic mix compost raised planter bed that is compost, organic compost, which to be honest is mostly chipped wood that has been mixed with steer or horse manure and composted for over a year. This particular blend also has earthworm castings and mushroom compost added into it, a bit of calcium, and just a generic raised planter soil that I get from our local rock and soil supplier in bulk. And then what I add to it, I grow a lot of dahlias. I store them in peat moss. I add a little bit of peat moss into this, and this particular bed, I'll add 1 or 2 bags of well composted organic steer manure, the 1.5 to 2 cubic foot bags that you get from the local hardware store. I don't do anything radical with this. This year I've added just a touch of prilled elemental sulfur, but not a lot. Our soil is very neutral here in the Central Valley, and adding just a touch of sulfur just drives the pH down just a touch to make it a little bit more like native conditions, but I haven't really seen that much of an issue. I will supplemental fertilize a couple times during the peak growing season when it's putting on the most foliage. So, once in like April, very early May, but not when the heat comes in. And then I may give it just a touch of fertilizer when the heat comes down in about mid to late September. Not too heavy in the fall, but mostly a little bit of phosphorus and potassium for both the fruit and the root growth. So when you're planting your raspberries, typically speaking, you can plant them anywhere from 18 inches to 3 feet apart, depending on how quickly you want everything to get up and running and how tightly packed and how much you want to spend on plants. Personally, when I am resetting my beds, I like to plant them about 18 inches apart because I'm trying to get up and running as quickly as possible, and the plants are just me moving plants from one section to another, so there's no cost involved for me. But you can plant them as far as 3 feet apart. It'll just take you a little bit longer to be in full production. So when I plant, I do set the plants in the middle of the bed, and you can see that most of these canes are in the direct middle of the bed. And the reason being is they will grow via their roots. So they'll grow under the ground and send up new shoots from the roots. So this whole bed will be filled with shoots by late spring. The shoots are just starting to pop up from the ground, and it is almost mid-March. It's March 9th today. So you can see that they're really starting to leaf out, and I will start to see little shoots coming up from the ground fairly soon, and that will be so this whole bed will be full of canes by midsummer. So just to understand, these are the canes. These canes that you see here are the canes that grew from last year. These canes, so raspberry plant canes from this variety will produce 2 sets of fruit. So the canes from last year that are really strong will produce fruit, and then the new shoots that come up from the base of the plant will produce fruit in the fall. So once these canes that grew last year produce their early summer fruit, they're done, and I will cut them all the way back down to the ground. And the shoots that are coming up from the ground that I will see soon will be the ones that will produce fruit in the fall. In the winter, those canes I will thin, and you have to understand that these canes will really fluff out. So right now it's just starting to put on some growth. They will fluff out quite considerably, and then they'll bloom, and then they'll start setting fruit. And so what you want to do is you want to thin your canes to the strongest canes, because the strongest canes produce the best fruit. Really thin canes often produce no fruit at all. So you can see I probably should have pruned out these because these are really, really thin. So I may come in and thin a little bit more. And I do want some space between the canes. So you can see I've got a little bit of air between the canes, roughly, 6 to 8 inches. So no way to be perfect about it, but just to give each of these branches each of these canes a little room to breathe, make sure that they're getting enough light and air so that the bees can come in and pollinate for really good fruit set, and that the fruit, each of the canes gets enough light and air to be able to get as much energy into that cane and into that fruit as possible. So I will thin the canes, and the shoots that are growing towards the outer edge of the bed, so you can see, some of them are closer to the edge of the bed than others. This whole bed will be full brim to brim with canes by the end of the season. I pull out the canes along the edge of the bed and really just keep the plants towards the center. And the reason being is that for multiple reasons. One, as you get closer to the edge of the bed, the soil dries out more quickly. And that is hard on raspberries in our climate. The other reason is that the canes on the side, which get more light, will shade the canes on the interior. And the ones in the interior will not set as good a fruit production because they won't have as much light and air for both pollination, both sun, and just the capacity to grow. So I will pull those canes and those plants along the edge and, either plant new beds with them or give them away. But those are unnecessary plants. So what I really want is the plants in the center, but I won't take the canes along the outer edge until winter when everything is dormant. So now under ideal production, like commercial production, what you would do is these canes that you've thinned down to, you'd also shorten them because you can see all the foliage is at the top. They have very strong what we call apical dominance, meaning that the hormones in the buds from the top will essentially keep the buds below them sleeping. If that makes sense. So the ones at the top are the dominant buds, and they keep the ones below them dormant. So if I cut it here, then you'd see all these buds crack. But these canes can get up to 6+ feet high in the prime of the season. And I don't want to collect fruit that high. 2, I don't want to trellis fruit that high. And 3, because we're in a really hot climate, I'm trying to get the fruit lower so that the plant doesn't have to bring water and nutrients up so high to the plant. This is a really convenient height for me, both in terms of trellising it with my ready-made trellis here, being able to reach the fruit, and then also having the best fruit because it's not having to travel so high up the cane. So this is really kind of my sweet spot, is about anywhere from 27 to 36 inches high from the ground. The thicker the cane, the higher up you can cut it, but there's kind of that sweet spot where you don't want it to go too high. If your canes aren't that tall, cut them down to the ground and let the new shoots come up and be strong, because the energy that they put into these canes means energy that they're not putting towards other things. So it's another reason why you want to thin the canes out and only keep your strongest canes. So it's plant balance, which we like to use quite a bit in the plant and agricultural world. It's the right number of shoots and branches and flower and fruit and root to keep the plant in balance so that you're getting the highest production of whatever you're trying to produce at the best quality. So a tree can only support so many fruit. Do you want 100 fruit? Or do you want 20 really big fruit? 100 small fruit or 20 really big fruit? So plant balance is a really good word to learn. So in the other thing that they do in commercial production, and you can see I've got this trellis. I've got a line set at a roughly 2 feet, and then another one up here set at roughly, about 4.5 feet. I would probably drop this down to 2 feet and then drop this upper one to 4 feet, but this is just what worked out really well for this particular bed. And what I would do is tie the canes to this lower line. And the reason why is it will allow as much light as possible to get down to the shoots that are growing in the center. And it'll shade the shoots or discourage shoot growth from the outer edge. And that will mean that in the next year, you will have your strongest canes in the center of the bed as you're starting to thin again. And so it also makes this fruit really easy to find, which can be difficult when the new shoots come up and they grow to the same height. Then the shoots that have fruit get lost in the shoots that are growing for the fall season. So this is and then when these are done fruiting, they're easy to find because they're attached here and you know that they're from last year, and you can just work your way down and clip them at the base. So when this cane is done fruiting, you would cut it down here at the ground. So other things is I have an automated drip system. So you can see I have water in each of my beds with a shutoff valve that goes to this line that feeds 4 lines. I don't know if you can see it, but 1, 2, 3, and 4 lines across this 3-foot wide bed, which means that there is water evenly across this entire bed. My recommendation is these are actually probably thicker than you need. I would probably have a 3/4 inch line here and then have just 4 1/4 inch lines that have built-in drip emitters every 6 inches. Now, if you're planting in the ground, you could use lines that have drip emitters built in every 12 inches because soil tends to be more clay in the ground and absorbs more slowly. But because these are raised planters and the soil is extremely fast draining, I like them every 6 inches. Now, in terms of watering, if you're in the ground, you probably only need to water them maybe once a day during the peak of the heat, maybe once every 2 or 3 days during in temperatures that range from approximately 75 to 85 degrees. When you get above 85 degrees, you may want to water every other day, and then above 90, 95 degrees, you might want to water twice a day. For raised planters, I water up to 90 degrees. I water twice a day, once at 5 a.m. and once at 1 p.m. And then when it gets above 95 degrees, I water 3 times a day, 5 a.m., 1 p.m., and 4 p.m. And I don't water for long because I'm not because these are raised planters. In the ground, you water longer because you're trying to encourage roots to go deep, and the soil takes much longer to absorb water. For these raised planters, because they absorb water and dry out so quickly, I water them more frequently, but for shorter durations. And that's just to keep the soil consistently moist. So you can also see that I've put in a 2 to 3 inch layer of chipped bark mulch. Now this is just bark mulch that we got from a free chip drop. It's pretty good quality, and I'm using that just to conserve the moisture so that the soil doesn't dry out and the soil temperatures stay nice and cool. So you're really trying to recreate that Pacific Northwest climate. The other thing that I will do in the peak of the summer is I will add shade cloth to the top of these. So the trick with shade cloth is to install it high enough that you get enough airflow under your shade cloth so that the air is blowing and you're blowing out the heat and you're not accumulating heat under that shade cloth. The other trick with shade cloth is to use white shade cloth. Now that's the trick for here in our hot climate. Other places in more cool climates that are trying to accumulate more heat during the summer may use black shade cloth, but for here we're trying to drop the temperature down. And 50% white shade cloth can drop the temperature underneath the shade cloth up to 10 to 15 degrees. And when our summer temperatures can spike above 110. That's a big deal. So, so that's what I recommend. And I would recommend having that shade cloth. For me, I like to put it 8+ feet above above ground level, making sure that there's at least 2 feet. Apologies, allergies. 2 feet of airflow above my plants. Because if that shade cloth is sitting too hard on the top of the canopy, one, it's hard for bees to get in it and pollinate. And two, where shade cloth touches your plants can often burn them. So anyway, so that's how I like to grow my raspberries. Those are my tricks for growing really great raspberries in the Sacramento region. Once again, this variety is called Nantala. It's Nantala, Nantala. And it's my favorite. Sweet, juicy, tart, great production, big berries. And this is how I do it. So wishing you a great growing season.